His attorney leaned closer and whispered 5 quiet words. Only 5. And Vincent's face, that confident, self-assured expression I had looked at across the breakfast table for 15 years, turned completely pale. His hands began to shake. The documents he had been so eager to sign trembled like leaves in a storm. And me, for the first time in 3 years, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand how we reached this point. How a woman everyone believed had lost her sanity was actually playing the longest, most patient game of her life. My name is Alexis Dunst. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was married to Vincent Mercer. 15 years of marriage, that's longer than most Hollywood relationships, longer than some small countries have existed, and certainly longer than my patience should have lasted. But I'm a determined woman. I inherited that from my grandmother. I met Vincent when I was 17. I had finished high school early, not because I was a genius, but because I was practical, driven, and eager to leave my parents' home. I got a job at Henderson and Price Law Firm as a file clerk. Minimum wage, constant paper cuts, but it was mine. By 18, I had worked my way up to legal assistant. I was good with details, good with numbers, and even better at keeping my mouth closed and my eyes open. Vincent was 24 when we met at a client event, charming, ambitious, full of plans about building a real estate empire. He spoke about the future as if it already belonged to him, like success was simply waiting for him to claim it. He said he was going to build something remarkable. I told him I could help with the paperwork. Romantic, right? We married when I was 19. Tyler was born when I was 20. I continued working part-time at the law firm while raising our son, building my 401k, and saving every extra dollar. My grandmother always said a woman should have her own money. Not secret money, she would clarify, just her own. Something no one could take away. At 23, Vincent's business finally started to succeed. He asked me to leave the law firm and join him full-time. He needed someone to manage the books, handle clients, coordinate with contractors, someone he could trust completely. So I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, client liaison, interior decorator for model homes, marketing coordinator, event planner. I handled it all while raising Tyler, managing our home, and somehow keeping everyone fed and reasonably content. My official title was wife. My unofficial title was everything else. For 11 years, I devoted myself to building Vincent's dream. And for 11 years, he received the credit, the awards, the recognition. At every industry event, I was introduced as Vincent's wife. At every celebration, he thanked his team, his mentors, his vision, but never quite mentioned me. Somewhere along the way, things began to change. He started making decisions without involving me. He stayed late at work more often. He began criticizing small things, the way I dressed, the meals I cooked, even my lack of ambition. I was managing his entire back office without pay, while raising his child and keeping his life in order. But apparently that wasn't enough. Then 3 months ago, everything shifted. He came home on a Tuesday evening while I was cooking dinner, his favorite, ironically. He sat me down at the kitchen table with a look that wasn't sad or apologetic, just businesslike. "I want a divorce," he said. "And then, I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can keep Tyler." He said it as if he were placing an order. "I'll take the assets, hold the child, keep Tyler." As if our 15-year-old son were an extra item. As if he were an inconvenience being generously left behind. I just stared at him. 15 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. At the kitchen table, between the salt shaker and the butter dish, like I was just another item he was discarding. What I didn't know at that moment, what I wouldn't learn until later, was that Vincent had been preparing for this for months. He already had a lawyer, Harold Whitfield. Expensive, experienced. He had been building his exit plan while I was meal prepping and scheduling his appointments. I had been completely blindsided by a man I trusted with everything. The next day, his mother arrived, Lorraine Mercer, a woman who had treated me like staff for 15 years. Walked in with perfectly styled hair and a carefully practiced expression of sympathy. She patted my hand and told me I should have tried harder to keep him happy. "Men have needs, dear," she said, as if explaining something complicated to a child. Her advice on marriage was always interesting, considering her own husband spent most of his time on the golf course to avoid her. But somehow, I was the problem. That first week passed in a blur. Vincent moved me into the guest room. Documents were prepared, settlements proposed, timelines set. Everything moved quickly, and I felt like I was drowning. To everyone else, I looked like a woman whose world had collapsed. A wife discarded after 15 years, a victim who never saw it coming. But here's the truth. What Vincent didn't know, what no one knew, was that 3 years earlier, I had discovered something. Something buried in his own financial records. Something he believed would never surface. And I had been quietly, patiently preparing ever since. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe and share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every comment. Thank you. Now back to the situation. Within a week of the announcement, Vincent had taken full control. The guest room became my permanent space in what used to be our home. My closet was reduced from a walk-in to 2 small sections he allowed me to keep. The message was clear. This was no longer my house. Within 2 weeks, he started bringing her over. Brittany Sawyer, 27 years old. She worked at his company. Of course she did. She had that polished, social media perfect appearance. Blonde highlights, flawless nails, and outfits that cost more than my weekly groceries. She walked into my kitchen as if she owned it. She wore my apron, my grandmother's apron, while making smoothies in my blender. She was younger than my marriage, younger than some of my belongings, but she made excellent smoothies, so apparently that counted for something. Vincent displayed her like a prize. They sat on my couch, watched my television, ate from my plates. He would put his arm around her right in front of me, as if I were invisible, like I had already been erased. The humiliation increased daily. First, he canceled my personal credit card. "We need to separate finances," he said, as if it were reasonable. Then the joint card. Then he suggested I find somewhere else to stay while we worked things out. My own home, and I was being asked to leave. Lorraine came over to help me pack. In reality, she went through my belongings and decided what I was allowed to keep. Old clothes, acceptable. Some family photos, maybe. My grandmother's recipe box. She hesitated, as if considering taking it herself. What I wasn't allowed to take. Any jewelry Vincent had bought, any furniture I had chosen, anything valuable. Those were marital assets, she explained, and Vincent was entitled to them. She packed my belongings in garbage bags, not boxes. Garbage bags, as if I were something being thrown away. Through all of this, there was one person I thought I could rely on. Diane Holloway. My friend since high school, 20 years of shared history through relationships, breakups, children, and everything in between. She was the first person I called after Vincent's announcement. She was supportive, constantly checking on me, always ready to listen. She came over with wine and let me cry on her shoulder. She told me I deserved better. She said Vincent was making a serious mistake. But something felt off. Small details. Vincent seemed to know my plans before I had fully decided on them. When I mentioned to Diane that I might fight for the house, Tyler came home the next day saying his father claimed it wouldn't work. When I told Diane I was considering apartments in a certain area, Vincent casually mentioned that exact neighborhood. Exactly. Just distant, uncertain. He didn't know who to believe, and his father was very convincing. I could lose the house, I could lose the money, I could lose everything I had spent 15 years building. But watching my son look at me as if I were the problem, that was the real wound. That was what truly hurt. So I hired a lawyer, Nina Castellano, recommended by my former firm. 52 years old, sharp, precise, and completely intolerant of nonsense. She reviewed my case and outlined the strategy. "You helped build this business," she said. "You're entitled to half of everything. The house, the company, the accounts. We fight." I looked at her for a long moment. "What if I don't want to fight?" Nina stared at me as if I had switched languages, as if I had suggested sending Vincent a thank you card and a fruit basket. She thought I was broken, too overwhelmed to stand up for myself. She had no idea. I moved into a small apartment with Tyler. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen smaller than my old pantry. Half our boxes didn't even fit. They stayed stacked in the corner of Tyler's room, a quiet reminder of how much had changed. Meanwhile, Vincent posted photos with Brittany. "New chapter, new energy. Blessed," he wrote. Lorraine commented beneath it, "So happy for you, sweetheart. You deserve happiness." My sister called, angry, "You need a tough lawyer. Take everything from him." Everyone had advice. Everyone believed they knew what I should do. Everyone assumed I had given up, that I couldn't fight, that I was letting him take everything. They were all wrong. Here's the reality about being underestimated. People stop watching you. They stop being cautious. They stop protecting their secrets. And that's exactly when you learn everything. 3 years, that's how long I had been carrying this information. That's how long I had known the truth about Vincent Mercer and his polished, impressive, completely artificial empire. It began on a random Tuesday night, 3 years before the divorce. Vincent was working late again, something that had become routine, though I didn't yet understand why. I was reviewing the company books, reconciling accounts, handling the work that kept everything running. And I noticed something unusual. A transfer to an unfamiliar account, then another, then a pattern. Money was leaving our accounts and going to places I didn't recognize. I investigated further. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, following every detail. What I discovered was alarming. Vincent had been taking loans against everything we owned. The house, our house, the one everyone admired, had 3 mortgages. The original loan of $400,000, a second mortgage of $350,000 taken 4 years earlier, a third mortgage of another $350,000 taken 2 years ago. Total debt, $1.1 million. Actual value of the house, $850,000. We were underwater by $250,000 on a home I believed we owned outright. The business situation was worse. Lines of credit maxed at $200,000, back taxes of $85,000, vendor debts of $120,000, equipment loans of $75,000. The company Vincent proudly talked about at every event, the one that appeared successful, was actually carrying nearly $500,000 in debt. Even the cars weren't owned. All 3 were leased, with large payments approaching. We didn't truly own anything. We just maintained expensive obligations. I sat in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, surrounded by documents, and calculated everything. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Total assets, around $1.6 million. We were at least $300,000 in deficit, possibly more. But where had the money gone? I kept investigating. Over the following weeks, I tracked every transaction I could. The result was clear. Cryptocurrency investments, $180,000, lost. Gambling, $75,000 gone. An apartment I didn't know about for someone I didn't know about, $60,000 in rent and furnishings. Lifestyle expenses that never reached home, watches, suits, trips, another $85,000. Vincent wasn't building an empire. He was building something unstable, using borrowed money that was already at risk. From a distance, everything looked successful. Up close, it was empty. My first instinct was to confront him, to demand answers. But I understood Vincent. I had watched him for years. If I confronted him, he would deflect, justify, and likely make me question myself. Worse, if he knew I was aware, he might try to access my separate finances, because I had always kept something of my own. My grandmother's advice stayed with me. A woman should have her own money. My IRA from my law firm days, rolled over but untouched, had grown to about $180,000. That was legally mine. Separate property. And then there was my grandmother's inheritance. She passed away when I was 28 and left me $340,000. Her will was clear. The money was for me alone. I kept it in a separate account for 6 years, never mixing it with household funds. She had maintained her own account for 50 years. Not secret money, she used to say, just mine. She was the smartest person I knew. Altogether, I had about $520,000 that was entirely legally mine. So I didn't confront Vincent. Instead, I protected myself. I worked with my uncle, a retired accountant, to set up an irrevocable trust for Tyler. My IRA and inheritance went into that trust. My name wasn't listed as a beneficiary. Vincent's name certainly wasn't included. It was solely for Tyler's future, education, a home, emergencies, untouchable. Then I documented everything. Every mortgage, every hidden account, every questionable transaction. I printed copies and stored them at my sister's house. I placed others in a safe deposit box. I saved everything on an encrypted drive. And then I waited. I knew Vincent would eventually leave. People like him always do. They lose interest, find someone else, or decide they want more. I just needed to be prepared. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of watching him deepen the problem, 3 years of attending events while knowing everything was unstable. I became very patient and very skilled at pretending I didn't know the truth. So when Vincent finally asked for a divorce, when he demanded the house, the cars, the business, everything, I almost laughed. He wasn't asking for assets, he was asking for debt. He just didn't realize it yet. Back in the present, I sat across from Nina Castellano and placed 3 binders on her desk. 3 years of documentation, every mortgage, every loan, every hidden account. She read in silence for nearly an hour. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed completely. "You've known about this for 3 years?" "I was waiting," I said. I knew he would leave eventually, and when he demanded everything, he would also take all the debt. He just doesn't understand that yet. Nina leaned back in her chair. The sympathy was gone. The concern was gone. In its place was something closer to respect. "So when you transfer the assets," she said, "you walk away clean. He takes the mortgages, the business liabilities, the leases. Everything becomes his responsibility. And my inheritance and retirement funds remain separate, never combined, legally protected, secured in a trust for my son." She stayed quiet for a moment. Then she smiled slowly. "Mrs. Dunce," she said, "I owe you an apology. I thought you had given up." I smiled slightly. Most people think that. That's the point. Her view of me shifted completely, from someone vulnerable to someone strategic. The plan was already in place. The numbers were confirmed. The documentation was solid. All I needed to do was let Vincent believe he was winning. And no one performs the role of a gracious loser better than someone who has had years to practice. The next 3 months required discipline. I became exactly what everyone expected: defeated, quiet, barely holding on. I attended mediation sessions with tired eyes and unsteady hands. I spoke softly, carefully, like someone who had lost confidence. I asked for very little, so little that even the mediator seemed uncomfortable. "I just want enough to start over," I said during one session. "I'm not trying to create problems. I know the business is important to him. I know the house matters to him. I don't want to make things harder than they already are." I requested a settlement of $50,000, my personal belongings, and shared custody of Tyler. That was all. Vincent agreed immediately. He had likely expected a fight for half of everything. That's what most lawyers would demand. Instead, I was asking for almost nothing. He looked at me across the table with something close to pity, as if I were someone he was generously sparing further difficulty. The performance was convincing, enough to secure lifetime performance, and my only audience was my dishonest, unfaithful, soon-to-be bankrupt ex-husband. With each passing week, Vincent's confidence grew. He stopped being cautious, stopped pretending to be reasonable. He began telling anyone who would listen that I hadn't even tried to fight. "She just gave up," he told his golf friends. I offered a fair settlement, and she accepted it without a word. Lorraine was worse. She boasted at her book club, at church, at every social event. "Vincent is keeping everything. That woman didn't get a penny." I always knew she wasn't strong enough for my son. To celebrate what he believed was a win, Vincent bought himself a new watch, $15,000. I know because I saw the charge on the business account. He was still using company funds for personal spending, still increasing the problem. He wore the watch to our next mediation session, making sure I noticed. He also took Brittany to dinner at La Maison, the French restaurant where we had celebrated our 10th anniversary. He posted photos online. Life is better with the right person. The right person, meaning someone who didn't yet know about his financial situation. Meanwhile, Brittany had started changing my house. New furniture in the living room, new artwork on the walls. She even repainted my kitchen gray. Gray, I had spent 3 weeks selecting that original sage green, testing samples, adjusting lighting, making sure it was perfect. And she covered it with a standard gray finish, as if it meant nothing. In a way, it matched her situation. Plain, temporary, and likely to change once the truth surfaced. Diane continued calling, pretending to be supportive while trying to gather information. I responded exactly as expected. "How are you doing?" she would ask, her tone full of artificial concern. "I just want this to be over," I would reply, letting my voice sound slightly strained. I can't keep fighting. I don't have the strength. Within hours, Vincent would know. I could almost sense him becoming more relaxed, lowering his guard further. Diane believed she was influencing me, but in reality, she was simply passing along information for free. While all of this was happening, Tyler was observing. And my son, thoughtful, perceptive, and far more aware than anyone realized, began noticing inconsistencies. He saw his father's new $15,000 watch, but heard him say they couldn't afford a school trip to Washington, D.C. He noticed Brittany's shopping bags filling the entryway, yet Vincent kept talking about financial pressure. He started to see the gap between appearance and reality. One evening, Tyler came to my apartment and sat at our small kitchen table. He looked at me seriously. "Mom," he said quietly, "is Dad actually rich?" I studied him for a moment. "What do you think?" He paused, thinking carefully. "I think something isn't right. I think he's pretending." I reached across the table and held his hand. "Trust me. Just give it a little more time." My 15-year-old understood something was wrong before 2 lawyers and a certified accountant did. Honestly, I should have charged him for consulting. Behind the scenes, Nina prepared our legal approach with precision. The main divorce agreement clearly stated that I was giving up all claims to marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, everything would go to Vincent. In return, I would receive my modest cash settlement and move on. But attached to that agreement was an addendum, a full liability disclosure. Every debt, every mortgage, every loan, every financial obligation tied to those assets. When Vincent signed for the assets, he would also legally accept all associated liabilities. The mortgages would become his responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to him. The vehicle leases would be his obligation alone. Everything was clearly documented, legal, precise, and unavoidable. Legal documents are like poetry, Nina once told me. Expensive, structured poetry that can change someone's life. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Harold Whitfield, Vincent's attorney, contacted Nina with concerns. "My client is assuming significant assets," he said carefully. "I'd like to request a full financial audit before we finalize, just to confirm everything." Nina remained neutral. "Of course, we can provide any documentation required." But when Harold raised this with Vincent, my soon-to-be ex-husband rejected the idea immediately. "No audits," Vincent said. "I built this company. I know exactly what it's worth. I'm not paying someone to tell me what I already know." Harold pushed back. "I strongly recommend verifying the asset values before signing. This is significant." "No," Vincent interrupted. "Brittany wants this finished. I want this finished. No delays." Harold had practiced law for over 30 years. He recognized when a client was making a serious mistake. But he also knew he couldn't force compliance, so he presented Vincent with a waiver, a document confirming that he had recommended an independent financial review and that Vincent was declining against legal advice. Vincent signed it without reading, just like he signed everything else, quickly, without reviewing the details. Impatience can be expensive, especially when influenced by the wrong priorities. The night before the hearing, Vincent sent me a message. "Thank you for not making this difficult." I looked at that message for a long time. 15 years of marriage, supporting his business, raising his child, managing his life, and he was thanking me for making things easy while he walked away. I replied, "I just want what's best for Tyler." And that was true. Tyler's future was protected. His trust was secure. And his father was about to learn a very costly lesson. That evening, Nina called. Thursday, 9 a.m., final hearing. "Judge Patricia Holden, are you ready?" I looked around my apartment, the simple furniture, the unpacked boxes, the small kitchen I had painted sage green again because it reminded me of stability. "I've been ready for 3 years," I said. 3 years of preparation, and it had finally come down to this. Thursday morning, 9 a.m., Vincent would walk into that courtroom expecting to claim everything. He had no idea he was about to take on a financial burden he had unknowingly agreed to. And the most important part, he had requested it himself, in writing, with witnesses. If you followed this far, you already understand what's coming. Make sure to like the video if you're ready to see how this concludes, and subscribe for more stories like this. Now let's continue. Thursday, April 17th, 9 a.m., courtroom 4B. I remember that morning clearly. The sunlight coming through tall windows, the quiet sound of paperwork being organized, the formal atmosphere of the courtroom. This was where 15 years of marriage would officially end, and where 3 years of planning would finally deliver results. Vincent arrived first. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal Armani one I had helped him choose 3 years earlier. His new watch reflected the light as he greeted Harold. He looked confident, relaxed, like someone closing a favorable deal. Brittany waited outside in the hallway. She wasn't permitted inside, but wanted to be nearby. I saw her briefly, perfectly styled, focused on her phone, treating the situation like a routine appointment. Lorraine was also present, seated in the gallery. She had dressed for the occasion, likely expecting a celebration afterward. When she saw me, she gave a small, satisfied smile, the kind people show when they believe they've already won. I arrived shortly after Vincent. I wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, my hair tied back neatly. I appeared tired, composed, and finished with the situation, exactly as expected. Then Judge Patricia Holden entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. Family court bench. She had seen every tactic, every form of manipulation, every version of dishonesty that divorcing couples could present. Very little surprised her anymore. She reviewed the file briefly, then looked up. Mercer versus Mercer. Final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Harold stood first. Yes, Your Honor. My client, Vincent Mercer, is assuming all marital assets, including the family residence, the real estate business, and all associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Dunst will receive a cash settlement of $50,000. Nina stood beside me. That is correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to these assets and accepts the settlement terms. Judge Holden turned her attention to me. She studied my face carefully, likely looking for signs of pressure or hesitation. Mrs. Dunst, she said, I need to confirm that you understand this agreement. You are giving up your claim to significant property, the family home and the business you helped build. Are you certain this is your decision? I kept my voice calm, slightly unsteady. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you are entering this agreement voluntarily? No one is forcing you? No, Your Honor. I glanced down briefly, then back up. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this resolved. The judge observed me for another moment. It was clear she was considering whether to question further or delay the proceedings. But I was represented by counsel, I was responding clearly, and I was making my own decision. Very well, she said. We will proceed. The clerk distributed the final documents, pages of legal language requiring signatures throughout. Vincent signed quickly, barely reviewing the content. He wanted it completed. He wanted to move on with his new life. I signed more slowly, carefully. Every signature was deliberate. This was the moment I had prepared for over 3 years. Across the room, Vincent glanced toward Lorraine and smiled. She nodded in approval. His phone vibrated, likely Brittany. He checked it during the hearing. That was consistent with his priorities. Meanwhile, Harold Whitfield reviewed the documents one final time. Main agreement signed, asset schedule signed, settlement terms signed. Then he reached the addendum, the liability disclosure statement. I watched his expression shift as he read. Confusion first, then concern. He turned a page back, then forward again, as if confirming what he was seeing. His expression changed noticeably. He leaned toward Vincent. Sir, we need to talk. Vincent dismissed him. Not now. We're almost finished. Harold lowered his voice. You are assuming all liabilities. Vincent turned. What? The disclosure statement, Harold said quietly, pointing to the document. The mortgages, the business debts, it's all listed. You are accepting full responsibility. For the first time, Vincent actually read what he had signed. I watched as he processed the numbers. House, $1.1 million owed, market value, $850,000. Business, approximately $480,000 in debt. Vehicles, $115,000 in lease obligations. Additional liabilities, $200,000. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Net value, negative $300,000. He hadn't gained assets, he had taken on obligations. Vincent stood abruptly. This isn't correct. He looked at me, then at the judge. She hid this. This is fraud. Judge Holden responded immediately. Mr. Mercer, sit down. These numbers are incorrect, Vincent insisted. She manipulated the documents. Mr. Mercer, the judge said firmly, sit down. He sat, but his hands were unsteady. His earlier confidence was gone. Judge Holden reviewed the documents, then addressed him. These liabilities are attached to the assets you are claiming. Assets in your name, your business, your property. She looked directly at him. Are you telling this court you are unaware of your own financial obligations? There was no response. Harold spoke carefully. Your Honor, I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review before finalizing this agreement. He declined. I have documentation. He presented the waiver Vincent had signed, clearly stating that he had been advised to complete a financial audit and had refused. The judge reviewed it briefly. So you were advised to verify these figures, and you chose not to. You signed a waiver acknowledging that decision. She looked at Vincent. Is that correct? Vincent stared at the document. I thought. Is that your signature? A pause. Yes. Then you accepted this risk voluntarily, the judge said. You had the opportunity to review the information. You chose not to. The agreement stands. Vincent turned toward me. You knew, he said, his voice unsteady. You knew all of this. I met his gaze. I managed your books for 11 years, Vincent. I was aware of everything. His expression shifted. Confusion, frustration, realization. He understood. I want to withdraw the agreement, he said quickly. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. Judge Holden shook her head. Mr. Mercer, you signed documents confirming your understanding of the terms. You were represented by counsel and declined further review. These obligations are yours. The agreement is final. She paused, then concluded. Mrs. Dunst, you will receive your settlement. Mr. Mercer, you will retain the assets along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I stood, adjusted my dress, and collected my belongings. Then I looked at Vincent one final time. You said you wanted everything except Tyler, I said calmly. You received exactly what you requested. I left the courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, Vincent's voice rose as he argued with Harold, demanding explanations and placing blame. Harold remained composed. I advised you to conduct an audit. You declined. It's documented. Through the glass doors, I saw Brittany's expression change as she listened. She looked at Vincent differently, no longer seeing the successful image she had believed in. She left before I reached the elevator, moving quickly without hesitation. Her exit was as quick as her arrival. Outside, the April air felt warm and clear. Behind me, Vincent continued arguing about fairness and responsibility. Ahead of me was a different life, smaller, simpler, but entirely mine. The consequences developed quickly. Within 2 weeks, Brittany had moved out, leaving a short note. This isn't what I expected. The house, now empty, reflected the reality of the situation. Within a month, Vincent attempted to sell it, but owing more than its value made that difficult. Instead of buyers, there were calls from lenders and discussions about short sales. Within 2 months, the business began defaulting. Vendors filed claims. Credit lines were frozen. The company he had spent 15 years building, and I had supported for 11, was deteriorating. Within 3 months, Vincent was consulting bankruptcy attorneys, evaluating what, if anything, could be protected. The answer was very little. Lorraine's perspective shifted as well. Her once confident tone was replaced with explanations. No one knew about the debt. Alexis must have hidden it. He was misled. But the documentation showed otherwise. The mortgages were in his name. The loans were in his name. The losses, from investments, gambling, and personal expenses, were all tied to his decisions. Diane called about a week after the hearing. Her voice was uncertain. I didn't realize things were this serious. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Some relationships do not recover. She called again a few times, then stopped. Lorraine attempted another approach through Tyler. She asked him to pass along apologies and requests to speak. Tyler listened, then replied, Mom is focused on her life. She doesn't have time for this. Lorraine wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. The outcomes reflected that difference. Tyler eventually understood everything. Not because I explained it, but because he observed it. He saw the documents, heard the explanations, and watched the situation unfold. One evening, about a month after the divorce, he sat with me in our apartment, the one with the sage green kitchen and modest furniture. You waited 3 years, he said. You knew all along. I needed to make sure you were protected, I told him. No matter what happened, I needed to know you would be okay. The trust, $520,000, remained secure. He was quiet, then hugged me. a genuine, unprompted hug, the kind that shows understanding. That moment confirmed everything. My $50,000 settlement went toward basic needs: rent, deposits, furniture. It wasn't luxury, but it provided stability. The trust remained untouched, reserved for Tyler's future. As for me, I enrolled in interior design courses at a local college, the path I had set aside years earlier. I started building something of my own. My first client was a woman named Sandra, recently ending a long marriage. Standing in her empty apartment, she asked, "How do you start again?" "One step at a time," I told her. "One space at a time." We painted her kitchen sage green. She smiled when she saw it, a small but meaningful beginning. A few months later, Vincent came to my apartment. He looked different, tired, worn, no longer confident. "I didn't realize how serious it was," he said. "I made mistakes." I listened, then responded simply, "You asked for everything except Tyler. You received it." "Can we talk?" he asked. "No," I said. "Goodbye, Vincent." I closed the door. That evening, after Tyler went to bed, I sat in my living room and looked at my grandmother's photo. Her recipe box sat beside it, the one item that truly mattered. "You were right," I said quietly. "Keep your own money, know your value, and don't let anyone diminish you." The apartment was quiet, smaller than before, but entirely mine. Every decision, every detail, my own. And for the first time in years, I felt something clear and steady: freedom. Thank you for watching. More of these stories are available. Choose one and continue. You won't want to miss what comes next.